this scare you at all? Like hypothetically, or if you were to lose to Jake Paul, that would hurt like your legacy or anything like that?
Nah, I don't
No,
think it would.
definitely not. I think fighters fight. You
Yeah.
know,
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to GK. Greg here with yet another dangerous and hot take. And to be honest with you, I don't even know how to start this video, and I don't know how to angle this opinion of mine in a way that makes sense to everyone, because no matter what I do, I feel like there's going to be somebody out there that gets mad at me. So you know what? I'm just going to give it to you the way I want to give it to you, and that would be very, very raw. And if you don't like that, well, don't make it weird. Now, you see the title of the video, so you obviously know what it's going to be about. But before we get into the meat and potatoes, the nitty gritty, I just want to let everybody know that I'm not a fan of Jake Paul. Actually, I don't like him at all. But the reason that I don't like him has absolutely nothing to do with his fighting ability, his training, whether he's training hard or not, or whether he's fighting good or not. It has to do with his public persona, the personality I perceive him to have. He just seems to be the type of guy that you hang out with and he can't shut the fuck up. Like, he's the type of guy that will just continuously tell you about how great he is, how many followers he has, how much money he has, and why you're lucky to be his friend, and let me buy you some bottles, bro, because I know you don't have that in your regular day-to-day life, you know, like that kind of vibe. And it's like, all right, bro, we get it. You have an older, better looking, taller brother that everybody liked, and you felt like you were in the shadow for years. It's cool. It happens. Time to get over it. But all of that aside, I can't really not give him respect when it comes to his boxing stint, career, whatever you want to call it. Let's go back to the beginning. He originally fought KSI's brother on the Logan Paul and KSI 1 undercard, and he beat him, but he took a little bit of damage in the process. He got a bloody nose, and after the fight, he would tell everyone that would listen that he's actually the superior Paul brother when it comes to boxing, and he wanted to secure the fight with KSI, and nobody paid any attention to him. They were just like, dude, shut up. You're the younger brother. You're not anything. Your skills suck. You got your nose bloodied by KSI's brother. So just imagine what KSI would actually do to you. Go away. At that point, he could have just easily walked away and made more vlogs or something, or a podcast, but he decided no. You know, I actually enjoy the sport, so I'm going to make my own path. And he secured a fight with Nate Robinson. Now, in hindsight, this seems like a joke, like, oh, Jake Paul just wanted to beat up on a former athlete and boxing wasn't even a sport. But when the fight was getting built up, there were a bunch of people saying that Jake Paul would not even know how to handle a guy like Nate Robinson because of his absolutely ridiculous athletic ability. I mean, he was a 5'9" guy that made it in the NBA. He is the 1% of the 1% when it comes to being athletic. Like, look around YouTube, look at the fight predictions for that fight. A bunch of people gave Jake Paul absolutely no shot. He went in there and he destroyed Nate Robinson. He just beat his ass bell to bell, knocked him down several times, and then proceeded to knock him out. So then people went, okay, well, I bet he won't fight a real fighter. So he went out and got Ben Askren to sign a contract to fight him. Now, I'll be the first to admit that this was kind of a cheap move and kind of an ingenious tactic on Jake Paul's and his team's part, because Ben Askren is an absolute anomaly when it comes to stand-up fighting in mixed martial arts. He is unequivocally the worst stand-up fighter in MMA history, and that includes the early UFCs where people didn't know how to do anything. I mean, if Ben Askren got knocked out by a teenager tomorrow on his way to get groceries, I wouldn't be surprised. It's just, he can't box, he can't kickbox, he can't do anything except wrestle. But he's such a high-level wrestler that it got him into championship fights in mixed martial arts. I mean, he's an anomaly in both his wrestling credentials and his lack of stand-up fighting credentials. It's like the yin and the yang, you know? The yin being his wrestling is just so good, and the antithesis, hope I pronounced that word right, being his stand-up, which is just so bad. Like, that's what Ben Askren is. But still, there were a bunch of people saying that Jake Paul couldn't handle a real fighting athlete, and that because he was a former fighter, he would pick up boxing really quickly. Wrong. Jake Paul knocked him out in one round. Not surprising to me. surprising to a lot of people, but my point still stands. He met the challenge head on. He did what people said he couldn't do. So then, of course, predictably, people said, hey, that was just Ben Askren. Ben Askren doesn't know how to box. Everybody knows that. Not impressive. So he goes, okay, well, Tyron Woodley's been clamoring for a fight. He's Ben Askren's friend. It's a great storyline. He's going to come avenge his friend. And he was known in the UFC for knocking people out. And no matter how hard people try to slither out of that fact now, that is still a fact. He won his title by knocking out Robbie Lawler. Robbie Lawler is a prolific stand-up guy in the UFC and MMA history. Then he had two really close fights with Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, again, one of the best strikers in the UFC and MMA, and definitely within the welterweight division. Then, and this was 4 or 5 months before he fought Jake Paul for the first time, he went life and death with Vicente Luque, another great striker in the UFC welterweight division, and he actually managed to hurt Luque. So, in a lot of people's eyes, there was no way that he could lose to a YouTuber that's been boxing for less than 2 years. And guess what happens? He loses to him. The next place the goalposts went was, hey, why don't you fight a real boxer? You claim to be a real boxer, you know? I mean, this is boxing, it's not MMA. Completely ignoring the fact, of course, that Jake Paul himself wasn't really a boxer, didn't go through the amateur ranks, started boxing after he was 20 years old, which is super late, but fine. He said, okay, let me fight Tommy Fury. Tommy Fury fight doesn't happen for whatever reason. I forget the details exactly, but it had to do with something. So Tyron Woodley steps in for a second fight. And at this point, people are like, well, listen, all Tyron has to do is just let his hands go. It's not like Jake can do anything to him. Fight happens, Jake knocks him out cold. And of course, the excuses pour in once again. Tyron was too old. But how come he wasn't too old to rock Vicente Luque just months before that happened? Right? Tyron was too small. Oh, was he? He was too short. Sure, he's about 5'9" or whatever they say he is, but he was short for the welterweight division in mixed martial arts as well, and nobody was saying he's too small. What weight does Jake Paul walk around at? 200 pounds, correct? That's the same exact weight that Tyron Woodley walks around at. And Tyron Woodley is leaner at that weight than Jake Paul is. Therefore, technically, Tyron Woodley is actually the bigger fighter. He was clearly the stronger fighter, and he was clearly the more explosive fighter. He lost because he just didn't have the boxing skills to hang with Jake Paul. And the real reason people got mad at that, and I feel like I can say this because I'm a huge MMA fan as well, but the real reason is the fact that Tyron Woodley losing to Jake Paul makes mixed martial arts look like shit. And I mean, you can say it doesn't, you can make any excuse that you want, but you know it's true. You know it makes the sport look terrible because this guy was a former world champion in the UFC, known for knocking people out, random YouTuber, not especially athletic, doesn't show any amazing skills, just trains hard for about 2 years, comes in, knocks him out. And that just makes it look like any guy off the street could do that. And of course, there's going to be people that say, oh, well, he's not just a regular guy. You know, he has a personal chef and he has the best personal trainer money can buy. And he has the best personal boxing trainer and he eats gold only. And, you know, he wears brand new clothes every time and he has plenty of free time. Okay, and Tyron Woodley doesn't? Tyron Woodley was a multi-millionaire when that fight happened. So what did he use his millions for? Exactly. Let's also not forget the fact that Tyron Woodley claimed to train at Freddie Roach's wildcard boxing gym where Manny Pacquiao trained, the legendary Manny Pacquiao, for over a decade before the Jake Paul fight. What happened with that? I mean, every metric possible except for age, Tyron Woodley had over Jake Paul. So technically after that fight, he really shouldn't have had anything left to prove. But people still talked, even though it doesn't make any sense. Tyron Woodley's too old, Tyron Woodley's too small, he's too this, he's too that, he didn't let his hands go enough. Okay. So now after the Tommy Fury fight fell through once again, after the Hasim Rahman Jr. fight fell through, which by the way, I believe Jake Paul completely ducked, but that's a story for another video. I made it. Check it out. He goes to fight a guy that Dana White claimed that he wouldn't fight. You know, Dana White said, hey, you'll fight all these guys, but I bet you won't fight Anderson Silva. Now, why did he say that? Because at the time, Anderson Silva had just beaten Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., a former champion, in boxing. That's impressive. To be fair, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. is kind of like the Tyron Woodley of boxing, right? So if anybody in boxing that was a former world champion would lose to an MMA guy, it would be him. But it's still impressive. He beat a real deal, legit boxer that was a former world champion and just happens to be the son of a legend, Julio Cesar Chavez, the original one. So Jake Paul rightfully thought that would be a great next opponent because Dana himself said that he wouldn't fight him and wouldn't beat him. So let's go. So now, of course, people are moving the goalposts once again before the fight even happens to say that, hey, Anderson Silva is just too old. Okay, but he wasn't too old to beat Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., right? He was fighting deep into his 30s when he was in the UFC. He wasn't too old then. Why is he too old now against this guy that's barely been training for 2 years? I mean, if you're going to make these excuses for the guys that he fights, you got to start making excuses for him too, right? Say, hey, this guy doesn't have any kind of a fighting background. He kind of sort of wrestled in high school, but that was it. As far as striking, he never kickboxed, he never boxed, he never did anything. He started training after the age of 20, which is extremely late to start training. I mean, be real. He's already fighting guys whose level he shouldn't even be able to sniff, and he's starching them. And there's only 2 ways to go about this. Either you admit that Jake Paul is, you know, this really prolific once-in-a-lifetime talent that can start boxing after 20 and be really, really good, or MMA guys just don't know how to box. And unfortunately, I'm leaning towards the latter. MMA guys don't know how to box. But Anderson Silva is not one of those guys, which is why I will make a prediction in this video. And I'm not going to be a little bitch about it and make a preemptive excuse. I believe that Anderson Silva will make Jake Paul look stupid. I think he'll beat the shit out of him and probably finish him. That's my prediction. He's bigger, he's stronger, he's more explosive, he's faster, he's a better athlete, and he has much more experience in boxing, not MMA, in boxing than Jake Paul. He has every single metric over him. And if the same Anderson Silva shows up that showed up against Tito Ortiz, against Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., Jake Paul is going to sleep. And if he doesn't, he deserves all the props in the world because this is a hard-ass fight to take. It's a huge risk. And, you know, the guy's only been boxing for 2 years, like I mentioned a million times in this video. So he's an asshole, but he deserves some respect. And with that said, the video is over. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Like, subscribe, dislike, share, all that good stuff. It's very good, very healthy for the algorithm. And I'll see you guys soon.